The order arrived dressed as kindness, which is how the worst orders always arrive. I had stood the door of the royal nursery for 3 years, and in that time I had learned the difference between a man who is afraid and a man who wants you to think he is. The courtier coming down the east gallery toward me at 4:30 that afternoon was the second kind. His name was Lord Cassius Vane, controller of the household, and he walked the way men walk when they have rehearsed the walk, unhurried, certain, a folded paper held against his chest the way a priest holds a text he means to read aloud. The late sun came through the tall arched windows of Harrowgate Palace and laid itself in cold bars across the marble, and Vane passed through each bar of light without once changing his pace, and I thought, before he said a single word, that whatever he carried had been written by someone who expected to be obeyed. I was Sergeant Thomas Reed of the King's Guard, and my post that afternoon was the carved oak door behind me, and behind that door was a girl of 8 years who was, at that exact moment, attempting to teach a palace cat to bow. I could hear her through the door. Princess Maelin had a way of narrating her own schemes aloud, as though the world were a council she was obliged to keep informed. "You bow to the Queen," she was explaining to the cat in the patient voice of someone who has explained this several times already, "because she is the Queen. You bow to me because I am a princess. You do not have to bow to Joran because Joran is only a prince and also he put a frog in my shoe." The cat, by the sound of it, declined to bow to anyone. Maelin sighed the enormous sigh of the misunderstood. That was the world behind my door. In front of it came Lord Vane. "Sergeant," he said, stopping a precise 3 paces from me, far enough to be courteous, close enough to be a presence. "I'll need you to step aside." "My lord," I said. I did not step aside. A guard does not step aside because a man uses the word need. Vane smiled. It was a good smile. He had clearly spent money on it. "There's been a development," he said, lowering his voice to the register men use when they want you to feel included in something grave. "A credible threat against the princess. We've had word, I won't trouble you with the particulars, they're above your grade, that her safety here can no longer be assured. The decision has been taken to remove her to a secure location until the matter is resolved. Quietly. Tonight." He unfolded the paper as he spoke, with the small theatrical care of a man revealing a winning hand, and held it out so that I could see the seal at the foot of it, red wax, the household crest pressed clean and deep. "Everything is in order. You'll hand her into the care of the men I've brought, and they'll see to the rest." Behind me, through the door, Maelin had moved on from the cat to a song with no discernible tune, something about a dragon who was very polite. I looked past Lord Vane down the gallery. He had not come alone. 4 men stood at the far end where the gallery opened onto the grand stair, and they were not household staff. They wore dark, plain, well-cut coats, the kind that are meant to look like nothing and therefore announce themselves, and they stood the way men stand when standing is their profession. One of them had his hands clasped before him. One had his hands behind his back. None of them looked at me. They looked at the door. "A secure location," I said. "For her own protection," said Vane. "I should think a man in your position would be glad of it. If anything happened to the child on your watch, Sergeant." He let the sentence open like a trapdoor and did not finish it, which was its own kind of finishing. I have thought about that afternoon more times than I can count, and what I keep returning to is how reasonable it all was. A paper, a seal, a threat. There is always in a palace a threat somewhere plausibly. A man of rank in the grave, unhurried voice of authority, 4 professionals at the end of the hall, a small girl singing about a polite dragon behind an oak door, and the easiest thing in the world, the thing 15 years of trained obedience told me to do, was to take the paper, read the seal, open the door, and hand her over. That is what the order was built to make me do. It was built well. It nearly worked. What stopped me was not courage. People have called it courage since, and it was not. It was a smaller, harder thing. I had stood that door long enough to know how the household moved when a child was genuinely in danger. I had seen it once. A fire in the West Wing 2 winters past, and it did not move like this. When a child is truly in danger, the people who love her come running. They do not bother to be quiet. They do not bring a sealed paper. They come themselves. They do not send a controller with a smile he paid for, and 4 men who will not meet your eye. The Queen was not here. That was the thing my mind kept circling. If Princess Maelin's safety could no longer be assured at Harrowgate, where was her mother? Where was Queen Saralind, who 3 days ago had knelt on this very floor to retie her daughter's shoe and stayed kneeling to hear the end of a story about a dragon? Where was Prince-Consort Aldric? A removal quietly tonight, for the child's protection, and not one word of it from either parent, not a note, not a footman sent ahead, nothing but Lord Cassius Vane and his good smile and his clean red seal. "You're hesitating," Vane observed. The warmth had begun very slightly to cool. "I'd remind you, Sergeant, that the order is lawful and the time is short. Every minute we stand here is a minute the threat is unaddressed. Open the door." I did not open the door. I have been told since that there was a long silence here, that I stood so still that one of the housemaids who had stopped at the end of the gallery thought I had not understood. I had understood. I was doing the only thing a man in my position could do, which was the thing I had been trained for and the thing that, it turned out, no one had planned for. I was thinking, slowly, on purpose, in a corridor built to hurry me. And then I asked the question. I did not raise my voice. I have gone over it many times, and I am told I did not raise my voice at all, that if anything I lowered it, so that Vane had to lean a half-inch nearer to catch it, and the 4 men at the end of the hall went still in the way that water goes still before it turns. "On whose authority, my lord?" I said, "and what becomes of the child the moment she is out of sight?" Lord Vane did not answer. That is the part I remember most clearly of all. Not the seal, not the 4 men, not the song behind the door. The half-second in which a man who had an answer prepared for every other question I might have asked, who had rehearsed the walk and bought the smile and pressed the wax, discovered that he had no answer for that one. His mouth opened. His eyes moved very slightly to the paper in his hand, as though the answer might be written there and he had merely forgotten it. And it was not. It is a small thing to watch a man's certainty leave him. It happens behind the eyes in less time than it takes to draw breath. But once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it, and I saw it in Lord Cassius Vane at 4:30 on that cold gold afternoon, and I knew, not suspected, knew, that the paper in his hand was a lie, and that the 4 quiet men at the end of the gallery had not come to protect a princess. They had come to take one. A lesser man would have lost the moment there. Vane was not a lesser man, whatever else he was. The certainty came back into his face, not all of it, but enough, and he folded the paper closed again with a snap, and the smile returned, thinner now, with the warmth scraped off it. "You forget yourself, Sergeant," he said. "You are a doorkeeper. You are not asked to weigh the authority of an order. You are asked to obey it. The authority is the household's, the seal is before your eyes, and the threat is real. As for what becomes of the princess, she will be safe, which is more than can be said if she remains here under the protection of a man who answers a controller of the household with riddles." He took a half-step closer. "I will say this once more, and then I will note your name, and the consequences of what follows will be yours alone. Open the door." "My lord," I said, "I cannot." "You can, you simply will not." "I will not," I agreed. There was no profit in pretending otherwise, and a man who lies to dress up his refusal has already half-surrendered it. An order to take a child is not a small order. It is the largest order a man can be given, because it cannot be undone. If I am wrong to refuse it, I will be wrong for one night, and tomorrow I will be corrected, and the princess will be exactly where she is now, behind this door safe, and I will take my reprimand. If I am wrong to obey it, I let the seal of his own sentence hang there a moment, the trapdoor turned back on him. There will be no tomorrow in which to correct it. So I will be wrong if I must be wrong on the side that can be mended. I do not know where the words came from. I had not planned them. I had planned nothing. You cannot plan for a thing you do not believe will ever come to your door. But they were true, and I have noticed that true things, said plainly, have a weight that the most polished lie cannot match. And I watched them land on Lord Vane, and I watched him decide, in that instant, that I was not going to be moved by argument. Which meant he would try something else. He glanced once, briefly, the smallest betrayal, toward the 4 men at the end of the gallery. It was not a signal. It was the involuntary flick of a man taking inventory of his force. But I caught it, and I understood what it meant, and a cold and very clear calm came over me, the calm I had felt only twice before in my life, both times in places I do not speak of, before I joined the guard, when the world had narrowed to a single doorway, and the few feet of ground I had decided no one would cross. I shifted my weight, not much, an inch, enough to square myself to the door, to put the whole width of my back against the oak to free my hands. I did not touch the rifle. A rifle in a palace corridor near a child is not a tool, it is a confession, and besides, the rifle was never the point. The point was that I was a wall, and a wall does not need a weapon. It needs only to not move. You would raise your hand against the household, Vane said softly, watching me. Against a lawful order. That is mutiny, Sergeant. Do you understand what that word costs? I understand exactly what it costs, I said. I have read the same regulations you have, my lord, and likely a great deal more carefully, because I have had to live inside them and you have only had to quote them. And there is a line in them that you have either forgotten or have hoped that I would. A guard's first duty is to the safety of the person of the royal he is set to protect, not to the household, not to the controller, to the person. To her, I tilted my head the smallest fraction toward the door, toward the song that had, I realized, gone quiet. Maelin had stopped singing, and I did not like that she had stopped singing, because a child who stops singing is a child who has begun to listen. If those two duties ever conflict, if an order from the household would put the person in danger, the regulation does not leave it to my judgment, my lord. It commands me to refuse. So you see, I am not disobeying an order. I am obeying the only one that outranks it. For the length of 3 heartbeats, nobody in that gallery moved. And then a door opened somewhere below us, and the sound of fast footsteps came up the grand stair, and a voice, a woman's voice, low and accustomed to being heard, said, "Lord Vane. I was told you were on the East Gallery. I wonder if you would tell me why." It was not the Queen. I knew the Queen's voice, and this was not it, and for one falling instant my heart went down into my boots, because I had been holding, without quite admitting it, to the hope that help would arrive in the shape of someone who could simply end this with a word. But the woman who came around the head of the stair, brushing past the 4 still men as though they were furniture, and I saw them shift. I saw them not know what to do about her, and that told me something too, was not the Queen. She was Mistress Etta Harrow, the children's governess, a spare woman of 60 with iron-gray hair pinned hard back, and the kind of face that has spent 40 years being unimpressed by the excuses of small persons, and has lost the ability to be impressed by the excuses of large ones. She had taught Princess Maelin her letters. She had taught Prince Joran his, and his mother before him, for Etta Harrow had served the house of Harrowgate so long that she had effectively become a fixture of it, a load-bearing wall of the place, and she came up that gallery now with a candlestick in one hand, not as a weapon, I think, but simply because she had been carrying it when the wrongness of the evening reached her, and she had not thought to set it down, and she planted herself in the middle of the marble floor between Lord Vane and his 4 men. And she looked at the paper in his hand, and then she looked at me, and then she looked back at him. "You'll forgive an old woman's slowness," she said, in a voice as dry as a struck match. "I am trying to understand. There are 4 men I have never seen in this house standing at the top of my stair. There is a controller at the door of my nursery, and there is a paper in your hand, my lord, that I was not shown, concerning a child I have raised that I was not told of. Have I that right?" "Mistress Harrow," said Vane, and the smoothness came back over him like oil over water, "this does not concern you. A security matter. The sergeant has already been informed." "The sergeant," said Etta Harrow, "has the better sense of the two of you by the look of him, and he is half your age and a quarter your rank, which I should think would shame a wiser man." She did not raise her voice either. It runs in a household, I have come to think, the lowering of the voice in the gravest moments. It is the loud who are unsure. "I asked you a question, Lord Vane. On whose authority is the princess to be taken from this house tonight?" And there it was again. The same question. Mine, asked again by a woman who had no rifle and no rank and nothing but 60 years of standing in the right place at the right time. And I watched Lord Cassius Vane fail to answer it for the second time in a quarter of an hour. And I knew that whatever was rotten in this was bigger than one controller, and that the night had only just begun to turn. Vane recovered faster the second time. A man learns. He drew himself up and let the warmth go entirely now, and what was left underneath it was colder and more honest than anything he had shown so far, which is the one good thing I can say about Lord Cassius Vane. When his masks came off, they came off all the way. "Very well," he said. "Since the corridor has filled with people who imagine that their devotion entitles them to opinions, let me be plain, so that no one mistakes their position. The princess is to be removed tonight for reasons of state that are not yours to question, and would not be yours to understand. The order is lawful. I have brought men to see it carried out because I anticipated, correctly, it seems, that sentiment might be mistaken for duty by those too low to know the difference. You may stand aside and be remembered as servants who knew their place, or you may stand in the way and be removed along with your objections, and explain yourselves afterward to a tribunal that will not be inclined to charity." He turned his head. "Mr. Crail." The man at the end of the gallery with his hands clasped before him unclasped them. He came forward. He moved well, too well, with the economical, weightless walk of a man who has spent a great deal of his life learning how to close distance without seeming to, and every alarm I owned, the old ones, the ones from before the guard, woke up at the sight of it. Crail was not a thug. Vane had not hired thugs. He had hired professionals, and that frightened me more than thugs would have, because thugs make noise and professionals do not. And a child taken silently is a child gone before anyone with the right to stop it even knows to come running. I want to set down plainly what was true in that moment. I was one man. There were 4 of them and a controller with a sealed order, and the law on its face was on his side, and I had nothing but an old woman with a candlestick, a regulation half the palace had forgotten, and a closed oak door. If it came to hands, and Crail's unclasped hand said it might, I could perhaps put one down before the other 3 reached the door, perhaps 2 if the gallery stayed narrow. Not 4. Not 4 and a controller. A wall holds until it is pushed past its strength, and then it is only rubble, and rubble does not guard anyone. So I did the thing that a man does when he cannot win the fight in front of him. I changed the fight. "Mr. Crail," I said before he had closed half the distance, and he stopped, because his name in my mouth surprised him and I had wanted it too. "You've a careful walk, army." He said nothing, but the not saying was an answer. I thought so. "I'll tell you something then, soldier to soldier, that his lordship can't, because his lordship has never stood a post in his life." I did not look at Vane. I kept my eyes on Crail, because Crail was the one who would have to put his hands on a child, and Crail was the one in whom there might still be a man. When this is over, and it will be over one way or the next, there will be an accounting. There always is. And when the accounting comes, the controller will have a paper and a seal and 40 reasons why it wasn't his hand on the door. He'll have lawyers. He'll have the word reasons of state, which is the word powerful men use to mean I'd rather not say, and you'll have nothing. You'll have your 2 hands and the memory of what you did with them, and a question you'll be asked for the rest of your life by people who outrank his lordship by a great deal more than he outranks me. They'll ask you the same thing I asked him. I let it sit a half-beat. On whose authority? And what became of the child? Creel's eyes flicked once, the same involuntary betrayal as his master's toward Vane. And in that flick I read everything I needed, that Creel did not know, that none of the four of them knew. That they had been hired with a paper and a seal and a fee, and that not one of them had been told the thing I had asked at the door, the thing that mattered more than any of it. What becomes of the child the moment she is out of sight? Because the man who hired them had known, with the certainty of a man who has thought it through coldly, that they would not do the work if they knew the answer. He hasn't told you, I said quietly to Creel alone, has he? That's enough. Vane's voice had a crack in it now, a hairline the first I had heard. Creel. The door now. And Creel did not move. It was the smallest mutiny, a man simply not taking a step. But I have stood in enough doorways to know that the whole weight of a thing can hang on a man not taking a step, and the gallery hung on it now, all of us. Vane and his 3 other men, and Etta Harrow with her candlestick and me with my back to the oak, while Mr. Creel stood in a bar of cold gold light and decided, visibly, openly, whether the fee was worth a question he would carry to his grave. I was told, Creel said at last slowly to no one in particular, that the household wanted a child moved to safety, discreet escort, standard work. He looked at the paper in Vane's hand as though seeing it new. I wasn't told there'd be a guard at the door who'd refuse it. A guard refusing it. He said the words again, turning them over. Standard work, the household doesn't refuse itself. He is a doorkeeper exceeding his. He's King's guard, said Creel, and now he did look at Vane full on, and I saw the professional in him take the measure of the controller and find it short. King's guard don't refuse a household order for sport, my lord. They're bred not to. So either that man's gone mad in the last 10 minutes, he tipped his chin at me without looking away from Vane, or he knows something about your paper that I don't, and I find I'd like to know which before I put my hands on a princess. The gallery was very quiet. Behind me, through the oak, I heard the smallest sound, the soft creak of the floorboard just inside the nursery door, the one that always creaked, the one I had learned the exact place of in 3 years of standing outside it. And I knew that Princess Maelin had come to the door and was standing on the other side of it, an inch of carved oak away from me, listening to grown men decide her night, and the cold clear calm in me sharpened to something that was almost pain. Because whatever else happened in that gallery, she was not going to be afraid. I would not have her afraid. I made that promise to the door, silently, the way you make the promises that matter, and then I lifted my voice, just slightly, just enough to carry through the oak, and I said something that was for her and disguised as something for them. Mistress Harrow, I said, easy and even as though we had all the time in the world, I think the princess may be wondering at the noise. Would you tell her, through the door, that Sergeant Reed is at his post, and that everything is exactly as it should be, and that she's to mind the cat? Etta Harrow looked at me, and the iron in her face cracked just once into something terribly tender, and then sealed itself again, and she crossed to the door past Vane, past the frozen Creel, and she laid her free hand flat on the oak beside my shoulder, and she said, in the dry, warm voice she must have used 1,000 times at bedtimes, Maelin, my duck, Sergeant Reed is at his post, and all is well, and you're to mind that cat or it'll be into the milk. We'll be done out here directly. And a small voice on the other side of the door, steady, only a little uncertain, a girl trying very hard to be exactly as brave as she had been told everything was, said, Is Sergeant Reed staying? I'm staying, Your Highness, I said. I'm not going anywhere, mind the cat. All right, said the small voice, and the floorboard creaked again as she stepped back from the door, and I heard her say to the cat in a voice that was rebuilding its certainty as it spoke, He's staying, so you needn't worry. I have done a number of things in my service that I am told were brave. None of them cost me what it cost to keep my voice easy through that door. And when I had done it, when the small voice had gone back to its cat, I turned my eyes again to Lord Cassius Vane, and I found that the gallery had tilted, that the 4 men and the controller and the old woman and the 1 guard were no longer arranged as they had been, that something had moved that could not move back, and that the thing which had moved it was not my rifle and not my fists but a question asked twice, that a guilty man could not answer. Lord Vane understood that he was losing the gallery. I will give him this. He understood it precisely, and he did not panic, and he reached, as cornered men of his kind always reach, for the one thing he believed would still work when reason and rank had failed him. He reached for a name. "You think this is mine," he said, and the calm came back, but it was a manufactured calm now, the calm of a man laying down a card he had hoped not to need. "You think a controller of the household woke this morning and decided on his own account to take a princess from her bed. You flatter me, Sergeant, and you flatter yourself, that the matter is small enough for one man to refuse it at a door." He let his gaze travel across all of us, Crail, the old woman, me, gathering us up to be told a hard truth for our own good. "The order does not come from me. I am its instrument, nothing more. It comes from the highest place in this house. It comes from the crown." I felt the gallery move again, and this time it moved the wrong way. I saw it on Crail's face first, the slackening of his resolve, the return of the professional who has been reminded that he is, after all, only a hired pair of hands, and that hands do not get to inspect the warren of the crown. I saw the other 3 shift their weight forward an inch. I saw Edda Harrow's knuckles whiten on the candlestick. And I felt the cold certainty I had built drain a little out of the air, because there is no name in a kingdom heavier than that one, and Vane had laid it down flat on the marble between us like a coin that ends an argument. "From the Queen," I said. "From the crown," Vane repeated smoothly, and I noticed, the way you notice the one wrong note in a piece you know well, that he had not said yes, and that he had not said her name. "Her Majesty is not unaware that her household harbors dangers she would rather her children did not see. A mother does not always wish to be the one who gives the hard order. That is what a controller is for, to carry what cannot be carried in the open." He almost had it back then. He nearly had the whole gallery back. "So you see, Sergeant, your fine question has its answer after all. On whose authority? On the crown's. And now you will open the door, because you have asked your question, and you have had your answer, and a man who will not be satisfied even by the word of his queen is not a loyal guard. He is a traitor." It was very well done. It would be easy, telling this afterward, to make Lord Cassius Vane a fool, and he was not a fool. He was the most dangerous thing a palace can grow, which is a clever man who has decided that his own judgment is a sufficient substitute for honesty. The trap of his words was beautifully made. To open the door was to hand over the princess. To refuse now was, he had arranged it so, to call the queen a liar, to set my judgment above the crown's, to be, by his definition, the traitor. And I would have been caught in it. I am not too proud to say so. A name like that, laid down by a man of rank, in a corridor, in the failing light, with 4 professionals and a clean red seal. It is a great deal to stand against with nothing but a question. I felt myself, for one terrible breath, begin to bend. What saved me was not my own steadiness. It was the second question. The one Edda Harrow had asked at the door, the one I had asked first, the one that Vane had now answered only by half, and the half he had not answered was the half that mattered. "You've told us whose authority," I said. My voice came out lower than I meant it to, which is what happens when the calm goes very deep. "You've not told us the other thing. I asked you 2 questions at this door, my lord, and you have spent a great deal of breath on the first and not one word on the second, and I begin to think that's because the first has an answer you've invented and the second has an answer you daren't say aloud." I straightened off the door. "So I'll ask it again plainly and let the crown's own name stand witness to it. If this order is the Queen's, if Her Majesty has truly given it, then tell me here in front of these men, what becomes of the princess the moment she is out of my sight? Where is this secure place? Who waits in it? When does she come home, and to whom? Tell me the route, my lord. Tell me the destination. Tell me the hour she is returned to her mother's arms." I took one step forward, only one, but it changed the geometry of the gallery entirely, because a wall that takes a step is no longer a wall, it is a man who has decided. A mother who gives the hard order knows where her child sleeps tonight. So tell me what the Queen knows. Tell me where her daughter sleeps. And for the third time, Lord Cassius Vane did not answer. But this time it was different, because this time he had nailed his lie to the crown, and so his silence was not merely the silence of a man caught. It was the silence of a man who had just, in front of 4 witnesses and an old woman and a guard, claimed to speak for his queen, and then proven unable to say where his queen's daughter was to be taken. It was the silence that hangs a man, and every soul in that gallery heard it for what it was. "He doesn't know where she's to be taken," said Crail slowly. He had gone very still. "He's the one giving the order. And he doesn't know where she's to be taken." He looked down at his own unclasped hands as though they had nearly done something on his behalf that he would not have forgiven them for. "That's not an escort. You don't move a child to safety without knowing where safe is. That's—" He did not finish it. He did not have to. The word he did not say filled the gallery like cold water filling a boot. "Crail," said Vane, and there was real fear in it now, naked, the fear of a man watching his instrument turn in his hand. "You are paid to." "I'm paid to move a child to safety," Crail said. "That's the work I took. That's the work I'll do. And it seems to me," he turned deliberately, and set his back not to the nursery door, but to it, alongside me, so that there were 2 of us now against the oak, and I felt the gallery lurch a final time and settle into a shape Lord Vane had not designed. "It seems to me that the safest place for this princess tonight is exactly where she is. So I'll stand here, my lord, with the sergeant, until someone who can tell me where safe is comes and tells me. And if that someone is the Queen, I'll kneel to her and beg her pardon. But it won't be you. 3 against the controller now, if you counted the old woman, and I did." And Lord Cassius Vane looked at the 3 of us, and at his 3 remaining men, who had not moved either way and whose faces had begun to wear the careful blankness of men reconsidering their fee, and he understood that the gallery was lost, that the quiet, surgical, deniable thing he had come to do could no longer be done quietly, that whatever happened now would happen loud in the open, with witnesses, which was the one outcome his entire scheme had been built to avoid. So he changed it too. He stopped trying to win the gallery, and he did the thing that desperate, clever men do when the front door is barred. He went looking for a back one. "Then we are at an impasse," Vane said, and the smoothness came down over him one last time, like a man pulling on a coat to go out into weather. "And impasses, Sergeant, are resolved not at the door of a nursery but in the council chamber. Very well, you have your stand, keep it. I'll not have it said that the controller of the household brawled in a corridor with a doorkeeper over a misunderstanding." He stepped back. He smoothed the front of his coat. "I will return with those whose authority even you cannot pretend to question. And when I do, Sergeant Reed, you will open this door, or you will be carried away from it. Mistress Harrow, I'd advise you to consider, in the time you have, which of your loyalties you wish to be remembered for." And he turned and he walked back down the gallery, unhurried, certain, through the bars of cold gold light, the same walk he had come in by, and I knew, watching the 4 men peel off the wall and fall in behind him, that he had not surrendered. He had gone to fetch a bigger door to break mine with. And the worst of it, the thing that sat coldest in me as the gallery emptied, was that I did not know how big a door he could fetch, or whose name he would carry on it next, or whether the next name he laid on the marble would be one I truly could not stand against. The gallery emptied, and for a moment the only sound was the failing light, which makes no sound, and which I have never since been able to think of as silent. "Well," said Etta Harrow, setting the candlestick down at last on a side table, where it should have been all along, "he'll be back within the hour, and he'll bring the Lord Chamberlain or worse, and a paper twice the size, and when he comes the corridor will be no place to make a stand. She looked at me with those iron eyes, and I understood that the woman who had taught a princess her letters was about to teach a sergeant his. So, we have 1 hour to do the only thing that ends this, which is to put the truth in front of the one person his lordship cannot lie to and cannot remove. We must reach the queen. You don't know where she is, I said. I had heard it in my own voice an hour gone, the falling note. He's seen to that. A removal quietly tonight, he'd not have moved on the child unless he'd first made sure the mother was somewhere she couldn't be reached in time. That's not a controller's plan. That's a campaign. Her Majesty, said Etta Harrow, left at noon for the Founders' Day vigil at the old cathedral in the lower town, with the Prince-Consort. It is 2 hours rode there and 2 back, and the vigil runs till midnight, and she will not be disturbed for anything short of fire by her own standing order, an order, I'll note, that everyone in this house knows because Her Majesty makes it every Founders' Day and has done for 9 years. Her mouth thinned. Including Lord Vane, who arranges her calendar, who arranged, I should think, for the vigil this year to be the longest in living memory. It fitted the way the last piece fits, and shows you the whole picture you had been turning away from. The threat against the princess was not a lie wrapped around nothing. It was a lie wrapped around its own opposite. There was a danger to the child tonight, real and present and deadly, and it stood in the person of the controller of the household, and the only people who could end it had been sent, weeks in advance, 2 hours down a dark road and bound by their own custom not to come back early. Vane had not stumbled into an opportunity. He had built one, patiently, out of the ordinary furniture of the household, a calendar, a vigil, a standing order. But why? A controller does not take a princess for sport, and I did not understand the machinery of power well enough to have seen the shape of it. Etta Harrow did. The succession, she said when I asked, in the low, flat voice of someone naming a thing she had hoped never to name. Think, Sergeant. Who stands to gain if the Queen's children are not secure, who has spent 3 years drawing the household strings into his own hand, one appointment at a time, until a controller could bring 4 armed strangers up the grand stair and call it a security matter. Lord Vane serves the Queen, but Lord Vane is cousin, twice removed and bitterly proud of it, to the Duke of Marenholt, and the Duke of Marenholt is the man who would wear the crown if the House of Harrowgate ran short of heirs. She let that sit. A princess does not need to come to harm for a scheme like this to work. She needs only to disappear into a secure location, to become a card in a game, a thing the crown must negotiate to have returned, a wedge to crack a mother's will. That is what becomes of the child the moment she is out of sight, Sergeant. She becomes leverage. You knew it without knowing it when you asked. That is why he could not answer. I have stood many posts since, and faced worse things than Lord Cassius Vane, and I have never forgotten the cold that went through me in that gallery when an old governess put the whole architecture of it into 8 quiet sentences, because it meant the door I guarded was not the last door. There would be others, and one of them, 2 hours down a dark road, opened on a queen who did not yet know that her daughter's knight had a knife in it. Then we send a rider, I said. He'll have thought of riders, said Crail. It was the first he had spoken since Vane left, and we both turned to him. He had not gone with the controller. He had peeled off the others and stayed, and his 3 former companions had gone down the stair without him, and I understood that Mr. Crail had, in the space of half an hour, changed armies, and that a man who changes armies in the middle of a field is either a coward or the bravest man on it, and Crail did not have the look of a coward. A man like that, Crail went on, doesn't leave the road open. If you've a stable, he'll have a man at the stable. A telephone or a telegraph, he'll have a man on the line. He's not afraid of your loyalty, Sergeant. He's afraid of your reach. So he'll have cut your reach first. Crail looked at me, soldier to soldier, and there was something almost like apology in it. I'd have done the same in his pay. He came up that stair calm because he'd already made sure that whatever happened in this gallery, it couldn't get out of it. That's why he walked away without a fight. He doesn't need to win the corridor. He only needs it to stay a corridor, sealed, quiet, until the Queen's road is too long to matter. The cold deepened. He was right, and I knew he was right, because it was exactly what I would have feared in his place. Vane had walked away not because he had lost, but because he believed the house was already a sealed box, and that all he need do was fetch a heavier authority while we beat ourselves against walls that had no doors. "Then we don't send a message out," said Eda Harrow. We both looked at her. "He sealed the ways a message leaves," she said. "He's a clever man, and Mr. Crail is right, and the stable and the wires will be watched. But Lord Vane has spent his cleverness on the ways out of this house, because he is a man who thinks of a palace as a box with a child in it. He has not thought, and here, for the first time all evening, the old governess almost smiled, a dry cold flicker of it, about the ways through it. He does not know this house. He knows its calendar and its appointments and its strings. He does not know its corridors, because he has never had to walk them at night with a frightened child or a sick one, the way I have for 40 years. There is a way to the lower town that does not use the road, Sergeant, the old Vigil Road. The founders walked it before there were carriages, the processional way, under the hill, from the chapel crypt to the cathedral. It has not been used in my lifetime for anything but the founders' day candles. It is dark, and it is long, and it comes up in the undercroft of the very cathedral where the Queen kneels tonight. And there is not a man alive in Lord Vane's pay who knows it is there, because the only people who ever learned of it were children, the children of this house, whom I taught, because I have always believed that a child should know the way out of her own home in the dark." She drew a breath. "Maelin knows it. I taught her the start of it a year ago with a candle as a game. She thought it was a story about the founders. It was a map. I understood then several things at once. I understood why Eda Harrow had come up the gallery with a candlestick in her hand and not thought to set it down. I understood that the bravest planning in that house had been done years ago, quietly, by a woman everyone took for a fixture, who had decided that the children she raised would never be helpless in the dark. And I understood, with a lurch that was half hope and half dread, that the safest thing I could do for Princess Maelin was no longer to keep her behind the oak door, because the oak door was the one place in the house Lord Cassius Vane was certain to come back to, with a bigger paper and more men, within the hour. The game had changed. I was no longer a wall. A wall was no longer enough. I was going to have to move, and the thing I had refused to do, with every fiber of 15 years' discipline, the thing I had set my whole body against in that gallery, was to take Princess Maelin out from behind her door. Now I was going to have to do it myself, quietly, tonight, for her protection, and the bitter joke of it, that the truth and the lie used the very same words, was not lost on me as I turned at last and put my white-gloved hand on the latch of the nursery door. Princess Maelin was sitting on the floor with the cat in her lap when I came in, and she looked up at me with her mother's clear gray eyes, and she said, with the grave courtesy of a child who has decided to be brave and is checking whether she is permitted to stop, "Is it over?" "Not quite, Your Highness," I said, and I knelt the first time in 3 years I had knelt at that door, and it cost me nothing. It was the easiest motion of my life, so that my eyes were level with hers, because I have never believed you should tell a child a hard truth from above. "I need your help with something. Mistress Harrow tells me you know the founder's game, the Candle Road, through the hill to the cathedral." Her whole face changed. "The secret way," she breathed. And then, because she was 8 and the world was still a place where secrets were chiefly delightful, "Are we going to play it for real?" "For real," I said, "and it has to be the bravest, quietest playing you have ever done, quieter than the cat. Can you do that?" "The cat isn't quiet at all," said Maelin scornfully. "I can be much quieter than the cat." And then, because she was her mother's daughter and there was a steel in the small clear voice that I had heard before only in the Queen, she said, "Sergeant Reed, the men in the hall, did they come to take me away?" I have lied to powerful men to save my own skin and felt no shame in it. I would not lie to her. "Yes," I said, "they did." But they will not, because I am going to take you somewhere safe myself to your mother, by a road they don't know exists. Do you understand? She thought about it. She was a thinker, that child. She got it from somewhere, the same place she got the steel. Then we should fetch Joran, she said. I had not thought of Joran. To my shame, in the long arithmetic of that gallery, I had counted 4 men and 1 controller and 1 guard and 1 governess and 1 princess, and I had not counted the prince, who was 10, and who was, Edda Harrow said quickly from the doorway, her face gone gray, at his lessons in the North Tower with his tutor, on the far side of the house, an open courtyard and 3 corridors away. And in the instant she said it, I understood the true shape of the danger. The part Vane had been clever enough not to mention even to his own men. That a scheme to make a princess into leverage does not stop at 1 child when there is a second, an heir, a prince, asleep over his Latin in a tower with 1 tutor and no guard at the door, because a controller had quietly arranged, weeks ago, that the prince's guard would be reassigned to a security matter on the East Gallery tonight. Me, I was the prince's guard. I had been moved to the nursery door 3 days ago, by an order I had not questioned because guards do not question their postings, and the order had borne the household seal, and it had been signed by the controller of the household. The cold that went through me then was the worst of the whole night, because it was the cold of understanding how long a clever man will lay his ground, and how willingly I had walked onto it. Vane had not improvised this evening. He had been building it for weeks, the vigil, the calendar, the reassignment, the 4 hired hands, and he had begun by moving the 1 man who would have stood between him and the prince's door, and I had let myself be moved, and thanked the seal, and gone to stand a different door while the one that mattered just as much was left to a tutor and a latch. We fetch Joran, I said. Yes, Mistress Harrow, the prince first, then the road. Princess, you'll do exactly as I say every step, no matter what you see or hear. Promise me. I promise, said Maelin, and she set the cat down with a care that undid me a little, telling it to mind the milk, and she took Edda Harrow's hand and we went. We went the way the old woman knew, not the way the house was built to be walked. Through the linen passage behind the nursery, down a servant's stair so narrow my shoulders brushed both walls, along a flagged corridor that smelled of damp and tallow, the governess leading with her single candle cupped against the draught, the princess between us, silent as a held breath. And for a stretch of perhaps 4 minutes I let myself believe we would simply do it, gather the prince, slip into the hill, walk the candle road to the queen, and let Lord Cassius Vane return to the nursery within his hour to find an open door and an empty room and a cat, the cleverest man in the household beaten by the one thing he had never thought to study, the floor plan of the house he served. We reached the North Tower. We climbed it. We found the tutor's door, and Edda Harrow opened it without knocking, and the room beyond was lit and warm and ordinary, a fire and a desk and a wall of books, and it was empty. The fire was lit. A book lay open on the desk, face down, the way Joran left a book when he had been called away mid-sentence. A chair was pushed back. And the prince was not there, and neither was his tutor, and on the desk, weighted under an inkwell so that it could not be missed, lay a single folded paper with a clean red seal pressed deep into the wax. Edda Harrow reached it before I could. She read it standing, her candle shaking now for the first time all night, and then she looked up at me, and the iron face had gone to ash, and she said in a voice with all the dryness gone out of it, "He has the prince already. They came for Joran first an hour ago before ever he came to your door. The tutor handed him over to an escort of the household on the controller's seal, and thought nothing of it because why would he?" She stopped. She made herself go on. "The East Gallery was never the prize, Sergeant. The East Gallery was the show. He brought 4 men to your door and made a great noise of a sealed order and let you refuse him and walk away satisfied that you had held the line, because while you held that line, his quiet men carried the heir out a different door, and the longer you stood proud at the nursery, the longer no one in this house went looking for the prince." The candle road dropped away beneath me, The false dawn went out like a snuffed wick. I had won the gallery. I had asked my chilling question, and watched a guilty man fail to answer it 3 times, and felt the gallery turn, and believed, God help me, that I had saved a child by standing still. And all the while I had been the noise that covered the theft, the proud, loud, immovable wall at the front of the house while the back door swung. Princess Maelin was safe in my charge by a hair and a governess's old game. Prince Joran was already gone, an hour into the dark, on a road we did not know, into the hands of men who had not been told, would never be told, what becomes of the child the moment he is out of sight. How long, I heard myself say. My own voice came from very far away. How long ago? An hour, said Edahero, perhaps a little more. An hour. And the Queen 2 hours down a different dark road, bound by her own custom not to be reached. And the one man in the house who knew how a clever villain moves children in the night, standing useless in a warm, empty tower room, holding the hand of the child he had saved, having let the other be taken under his very pride. I am not ashamed to say that for the length of one breath I did not know what to do. It is the only time in 15 years of service that I can say that truly. And then a small clear voice beside me, my mother's-eyed princess, looked up from the folded paper she had read over the governess's arm. She read very well, that child. Edahero had seen to it, and she said the thing that put the spine back into the night. Sergeant Reed, said Princess Maelin. Joran knows the candle road too. I taught him. We could meet him. If they're taking him by the real road and we take the secret one, we'll reach the cathedral first. We'll reach Mother first, and Mother can stop anything. She lifted her chin, and the steel in her was complete now, the whole of it, the crown's own steel in an 8-year-old small straight back. We have to be faster than the road. And she was right. Of course she was right. The road is long and watched and full of waiting men, but it is only one road, and a clever villain who has sealed every way out of a house has, by his very cleverness, failed to imagine that the way to beat him is not to leave the house unseen, but to arrive at the destination first, by a road that was old before he was born, that no man in his pay had ever heard of, that ran under the hill in the dark, and that ended in the undercroft of the cathedral where a queen knelt, an hour's hard walking away, not yet knowing that both her children's knights had a knife in them, and that only one of them had a guard left between the knife and the child. Then we go, I said, now, and we go faster than the road. Crail came with us. I had half expected him to melt away once the noise of the gallery was behind him. A hired man who has refused one job is under no obligation to take up its opposite, but he fell in at the rear without being asked, and when I looked a question at him, he said only, I took a fee to move a child to safety, Sergeant. I mean to earn it, just not the child his lordship had in mind. And I was glad of him, because the candle road was dark and long, and I did not know what waited in it, and a man at your back who knows how the enemy thinks is worth a great deal in the dark. The entrance to the old Vigil Road was where Edahero had said it would be. In the chapel crypt, behind the tomb of a founder whose name had worn off his slab 300 years past, a low stone arch that you would walk by 1,000 times and take for a buttress. The governess pressed a place in the carving, and a section of it swung inward on a groan of iron that had not been disturbed in years, and beyond it the dark went down and away under the hill, and a breath of cold old air came up out of it that smelled of stone and tallow and time. I'll not come, Edahero said, and when I turned she had already set her candle into the princess's steady small hands. I'm 60 and my knees are 65, and I'd slow you, and slow is the one thing you cannot be tonight. I'll do the other half. I'll go back to the gallery and stand by an oak door I'll let Lord Vane think still has a princess behind it. I'll make him spend his hour breaking down the wrong door. I'll be the noise this time, you be the quiet. She bent, it cost her, I saw it cost her, and took Princess Maelin's face in both her old hands. You know the way, my duck, candle to candle, don't run. Brave isn't fast, brave is steady. Mind the steps where the water comes in. And when you see your mother, tell her Etta sent you, and that Edda kept the door. And the princess put her arms around the old woman's neck for one fierce moment, then let go, and turned to the dark with her candle, and did not cry, because she had been told brave is steady, and she had decided to be steady. I have served kings. The bravest thing I saw in all that night was an old governess walking back alone up a servant's stair to guard an empty room, so that a clever man would waste his strength on a door with nothing behind it. I never saw her afraid. I am not certain she knew how. The road under the hill was as she had promised, long and dark and old. We went candle to candle, for there were sconces along it at intervals, set there by the founders for the once-a-year procession, and the princess knew the trick of them, lighting each from her own small flame as we passed and leaving it burning behind us, a thread of light unspooling under the hill, so that even in that black weight of earth we were never wholly in the dark. She led. I want that set down plainly, because afterward the tellings made it a story about a guard, and it was not. The guard followed. An 8-year-old girl led 3 grown souls under a hill in the dark by a road she had learned as a game, and she did not run, and she did not cry, and at the places where the water came in she stopped and told us where to set our feet, and I followed a princess through the dark and was not ashamed to. But it was long, and the length of it gnawed at me. An hour is a long time when an air is already an hour gone the other way, and with every sconce we lit I did the cold arithmetic of the road above us. How far down the dark highway Joran's escort would be by now, how the gap between us was a race we could not see and might already have lost. Twice the princess stopped at a branching of the way, and twice my heart stopped with her, and twice she chose without hesitation. Left here, the right one goes to the river gate, and we went on. And I trusted a child's memory of a game over my own 15 years of training, because there was nothing else in the dark to trust. It was Crail who heard them first. He had the ears of his trade. He put a hand on my shoulder in the dark, and I felt the whole of him go still, and then I heard it too. Voices, ahead and above, where the road must come near the surface again, and the scrape of boots on old stone, and the particular careful quiet of men who are trying to be quiet and not quite managing it. That's not your governess's procession, Crail breathed. Someone's in the road ahead of us, down here in the dark. My blood went to ice. If Vane knew the candle road, if somewhere in his patient weeks of planning the clever man had learned the one secret the old woman thought was hers, then we had walked 3 souls into a sealed tunnel with one way out, and there was no gallery to stand in, no household to rally, no question chilling enough to ask in the dark to men who had us in a stone box underground. I put the princess behind me, my back to the wall. I had no rifle. You do not carry a long arm through a crawl under a hill with a child, but I had my 2 hands in the cold clear calm, and I made ready in the guttering candlelight to do the thing I had refused to do all evening, which was to fight. And then a small voice ahead of us in the dark, a boy's voice, cracking on the edge of tears and trying not to, said, "And the left one goes to the river gate, so we don't take the left, mister, we take the—" "Joran," whispered Princess Maelin, and before I could stop her she had slipped past my arm with her candle held high, and her clear voice rang down the old stone road, steady as a bell. "Joran, it's me. Don't take the left, you remember, the right goes under the hill. Joran, we're here." There was a moment of absolute stillness in the dark, and then the boy's voice, broken open now with relief. Me. The escort had not taken Prince Joran by the road at all. It came out in pieces, there in the guttering light where the 2 children met and gripped each other's hands, and the prince's brave front broke and rebuilt itself the way his sister's had. And a man stepped out of the dark behind him with his own candle, and his hands held carefully open and away from his sides, the way a man holds his hands when he wants you to know he means no harm. His name was Bertrand Lowe, and he was an underfootman of the household, 20 years old, and he had been one of the escort of the household, who had collected Prince Joran from the tutor's tower an hour before on the controller's seal. There had been 3 of them sent for the boy, 2 of Vane's quiet hired men and young Lowe, brought along, I think, precisely because a footman's familiar face would keep a frightened prince calm and quiet where two strangers would not. And Bertrand Lowe had done as he was told and helped the prince down the back stairs and out toward the river gate where a closed carriage waited in the dark. And somewhere on that walk, with the boy's hand cold in his, the same thing had happened to him that had happened to Crail in the gallery. He had begun to think. They wouldn't tell him where, Lowe said, low and fast, his young face shining with sweat in the candlelight. The prince kept asking, "Where are we going? Where's my mother?" the way a boy does, and the two of them just kept saying, "Somewhere safe, your highness," and never a word of where, and I thought, that's not how you take a child to safety. You'd say it 10 times to keep him calm. The only reason you don't say where is if you don't dare. And I'd heard there was a security matter on the East Gallery and the nursery guard reassigned to it, and I thought of the prince's door left bare, and the queen gone to the vigil, and the controller's cousin nobody's supposed to mention, and it all came up in me at once like a sickness, and he swallowed. When we passed the chapel, I told them the river road would be watched, that I knew a quiet way through the crypt, and they're not house men. They followed me, and once we were in the dark I put out my lamp and took the prince's hand and ran. I didn't know where I was taking him. I only knew I wasn't taking him to them. I looked at this boy, for he was little more than a boy himself, who had no rank and no rifle and no regulation to hide behind, who had simply heard a question go unanswered and could not bear it, and who had run into the dark under a hill against 2 armed men with nothing but a candle and a prince's hand. And I understood, finally, the thing this whole night had been trying to teach me. The line had never been mine alone to hold. It had been held at the nursery door by a sergeant, in the gallery by a hired soldier who changed armies, on a servant's stair by an old governess guarding an empty room, and in the dark by an under-footman who could not stomach an unanswered question, each of us, in our own place, refusing the same lie. The household had rallied, not from the top, from everywhere, from every place where one person stood who would rather risk everything than hand a child into the dark without an answer. "You've 2 men behind you in this road," said Crail, all business, stepping forward. "Armed. Knives, I think. Not guns, not down here. The controller wouldn't risk the noise so near the cathedral." Lowe's eyes went to Crail's face and widened. "You're one of them. You were at the gate." "I was," said Crail. "I'm not now. Stay with the children and the sergeant. I know how these 2 move. I drank with them this afternoon. I'll mind the dark behind us." And he took the prince's candle and went back the way the children had come, into the black alone, a hired man earning a fee he had refused. I let him because the cold arithmetic of the night had finally, for the first time, tipped in our favor. Both royal children were in my charge now, on a road our enemy did not own, an hour ahead of where he thought they were, and walking toward the one person on earth who could end it with a word. "Sergeant Reed," said Prince Joran, mastering his voice with an effort that I have respected ever since, "is it true you wouldn't open me's door?" "Lowe says you wouldn't open it." "It's true, your highness." "Even with the seal, even when Lord Vane told you to?" "Even then." The boy was quiet a moment, walking, his hand in his sister's. Then he said, with the terrible directness of the young, "Why? Everyone opens the door when Lord Vane has the seal. The seal is the household. You're supposed to do what the household says." And I gave him the truest answer I had. "Because a seal is only wax, your highness. It tells you a thing was ordered. It can't tell you the thing was right. There are orders a man must refuse no matter whose seal is on them, and the surest way to know one is this. When you ask what becomes of the person at the end of the order, an honest order has an answer, and a wicked one has only silence. I asked Lord Vane what becomes of your sister the moment she was out of my sight. He could not say. That silence was my answer, and it outranks any seal in the kingdom. I looked down at the 2 of them in the candlelight, the steel-spined girl and the grave, clear-eyed boy who would one day, if the house of Harrowgate held, sit a throne. Remember that, both of you. When you are grown and men bring you sealed papers and grave faces and reasons of state, ask them the one question. Ask what becomes of the person at the end of it, and watch whether they can answer. We walked on, and ahead of us at last the old road began to rise, and the air changed warmer and moving, and carrying on it the faint thread of a great many candles burning, and a great many voices lifted low in the old Founder's Day plain song. And I knew that we had come, under the hill and through the dark and faster than the road, to the undercroft of the cathedral and to the Queen. The undercroft door gave onto a side chapel behind the high altar, and we came up out of the dark into candlelight and the low rise and fall of the plain song, and a verger turned at the sound of us with his mouth open to protest, and then saw the two royal children, soot-smudged and candle-lit and gripping each other's hands, and a king's guard in a soiled red tunic with no rifle and murder in his eyes, and the protest died in his throat. I told him, low and fast, to bring the captain of the cathedral watch and to disturb the Queen for fire, by her own standing order, because there was a fire in her house tonight even if it threw no smoke. He went white and went running. He was a good man. The house was full of good men. That was the thing Lord Vane had never reckoned with. They brought us to her in the sacristy, away from the eyes of the congregation, and when the door opened and Queen Saralind saw her children, she did not cry out. She did not waver. She crossed the stone floor in 3 strides and went down on her knees and gathered them both into her arms at once, and held them, and over the top of their heads her eyes came up to mine. And I have served the house of Harrowgate all my life, and I have never seen anything in this world to match the look in a mother's eyes in the half-second before she has been told whether her children are safe. I went to one knee. "They're safe, your Majesty," I said, "both safe, unharmed. In your arms." And only then did the Queen close her eyes just for a breath and let the whole weight of the fear go out of her in one long silent exhalation. And then she opened them, and the fear was gone, and the Queen was back, and I saw the steel that her daughter had inherited whole. "Sergeant Reed," she said, "nursery door." "Yes, your Majesty." "Tell me all of it quickly." And I told her. The order, the seal, the 4 men, the question and its silence, the gallery, the prince already gone, the candle road, the footman who ran into the dark. Prince-Consort Aldric had come in by then and stood with his hand white-knuckled on the back of a chair, the captain of the cathedral watch with him, and as I spoke I watched the Queen's face, and it did not change. It only grew colder and clearer, the way deep water grows still, and when I had done she was silent for the space of 3 heartbeats. Then she said one word, "Marinholt." "Mistress Harrow named him too, your Majesty," I said, "the controller's cousin." "My cousin's cousin," said the Queen, "who has spent 3 years being charming to me across a council table, and 3 years buying my controller with whatever a man like Vane wants bought." Her arms tightened, very slightly, around her children. He could not take the throne while I had 2 heirs. So he meant to take the heirs, not harm them, no, nothing so crude, nothing that could be hung on him, only to make them disappear into a secure location run by men who answer to him, and then come to me, grave and helpful, my dear cousin, with terms. And I would have paid any price in the kingdom to have my children back, and the price would have been the kingdom. Her gray eyes lifted to mine. "What becomes of the child the moment she is out of sight?" "You asked the only question that mattered, Sergeant, and you asked it at the only door where asking it could still save them. Do you understand what you have done tonight?" "I held a door, your Majesty," I said, "badly." "He took the prince out from under me." "You held the right door long enough to ask the right question, and the question is what saved them, because it is the question that turned every honest soul who heard it." The Queen rose, lifting her children with her, and set them gently behind her, and there was nothing left of the kneeling mother now. There was only the crown. And he is not finished. A man who has gone this far does not stop because one door held. He has been at the palace this last hour fetching what he called those whose authority even you cannot question. He will have realized by now that the nursery is empty, and the prince is loose in the dark. He will come here to me to the vigil, because there is nowhere else left for the lie to go. He will come with a grave face and a bigger paper, and a story about a credible threat and children he has been heroically trying to protect, and he will expect to find a frightened mother who knows only that her children are missing. The queen's mouth curved, and it was not a smile, it was a blade. He does not know they are behind me. Let us not tell him. Let us let the controller of the household walk in and lie to my face, in front of witnesses, about where my children are, and then let us see what becomes of his answer when I ask his own question back to him. It did not take an hour. It took 20 minutes, and we spent them readying the trap. The children hidden in the inner sacristy with their father and 2 of the queen's guard at the door, the captain of the watch and his men placed in the shadows of the side chapel, Bertrand Lowe the footman waiting white and trembling but resolute behind a pillar with the verger, and Crail come up at last out of the dark with a torn sleeve and a knife he had taken off one of the 2 men below, who were, he reported flatly, minded to stay where they are for a while and trust in the crypt for the watch to collect, and myself at the queen's shoulder in my soiled red tunic, in the place a king's guard stands. And then the great west door of the cathedral opened, the cold night came in, and down the long candle-lit nave, unhurried, certain, through the kneeling congregation who did not yet know they were witnesses to a treason, came Lord Cassius Vane, behind him the Lord Chamberlain, an old and honest man whom I will not shame by naming his confusion, and behind him 4 of Vane's quiet men. The controller carried a paper twice the size of the first, with 2 seals on it now, and he walked toward his queen with a face arranged into the perfect grave mask of a faithful servant bearing terrible news, and I felt the cold, clear calm settle over me one final time, and I thought, he has brought his bigger door. Now let us see it broken. He went down on one knee before her. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice was a marvel, thick with manufactured grief. "I would have given my life to bring you any news but this. There has been an attempt on the children. I moved them on my own authority and the household's, the moment the threat was confirmed, to a place of safety. But in the confusion, your Majesty, in the dark," he let his voice break, the practiced break of a man who has rehearsed his grief in a mirror. "The princess's guard, a Sergeant Reed, resisted the removal, and there was disorder, and I must tell you with the deepest sorrow that in the disorder the children were." He could not seem to say it. He bowed his head. "We are searching, Majesty. Every man I have is searching. I will not rest until they are found. I came to you myself, rather than let you hear it from a lesser mouth." It was magnificent, the lie, complete and seamless, and aimed with surgical cruelty at the one wound a mother cannot guard. He had built it to do exactly what his first order had been built to do, to make the listener so afraid that they would do whatever the calm, grave, helpful man suggested. And it would have worked on a mother who did not know where her children were. The queen let him finish. She let the silence sit. And then she said, in a voice as quiet and as cold as the marble he knelt on, the voice I had heard come down out of the same blood at the nursery door, "Lord Vane, you have told me you moved my children to a place of safety. So I will ask you only one thing, and I will have a plain answer here before the Lord Chamberlain and the watch and God." She did not raise her voice. She lowered it, the way the gravest moments in that house were always spoken, so that the whole great nave leaned in to hear. "Where are my children now? Name the place. Name the men who hold them. Name the hour they are to be returned to me." Her gray eyes did not leave his face. "What becomes of the child the moment she is out of your sight, my lord? Answer me. Where are they?" And Lord Cassius Vane, on his knee before his queen, with the cathedral leaning in to hear and the bigger paper limp in his hand, opened his mouth to answer, and found, as he had found 3 times that night at a nursery door, that he had no answer, because the only true one would hang him, and every false one was about to be disproved in the most complete way a lie can be disproved. Your Majesty, the men are, the location is secured. I cannot in open church compromise them." "Bring them," said the queen. and the inner sacristy door opened, and Prince-Consort Aldric came out with a soot-smudged princess holding one of his hands and a grave-eyed prince holding the other, both of them safe, both of them whole, both of them looking down the nave at the kneeling controller who had just sworn to their mother that he was searching the dark for them. And the sound that went through that cathedral was not a gasp and not a cry. It was the low, terrible, rising murmur of a great many people understanding a great wickedness all at once, and it broke over Lord Cassius Vane like a wave, and I watched the grave mask come off his face all the way down to the cold thing underneath, and I watched the cold thing understand that it was finished. He tried even then. A clever man does not stop being clever because he is caught. He only turns the cleverness to the last thing left, which is escape. Vane came up off his knee with a speed that surprised the watch, and he had a hand inside his coat, for a paper, I think, some final forgery or perhaps for something worse. And he turned not toward the great west door, but toward the side chapel and the dark undercroft beyond it, the way we had come, the way he now understood his children had come, the only unwatched way out of a cathedral full of witnesses. He got 3 steps. Crail took him on the 4th, not a blow, nothing the congregation could have called violence, simply the weight of a professional stepping into a man's path and folding him down onto the marble, holding him there, one knee in the small of his back, while the captain of the watch came out of the shadows with his men. "On whose authority, my lord?" said Crail into the controller's ear, not unkindly, almost gently, giving him back his own question as a man returns a borrowed coat. "And what becomes of you now?" They took Lord Cassius Vane that night, and the 4 men with him, and before dawn the 2 from the crypt, the closed carriage that had waited at the river gate, the driver, and a clerk who had pressed the false seals. By noon the next day, on a sworn deposition from Bertrand Lowe, and a great deal more the Queen's people found once they knew where to look, they took the Duke of Marenholt, who had spent the night of the vigil at a country house a careful distance away, where a man arranges to be when he wishes to say he was nowhere near, and who learned, when the Queen's riders came up his drive at dawn, that the one variable he and his clever cousin had failed to account for in 3 patient years was not a guard's rifle or a Queen's army, but a question an honest soul cannot leave unasked, and that there had been more honest souls in the house of Harrowgate than they had coin to buy. There was a tribunal, as there always is. Lord Vane had his lawyers and his reasons of state, just as I had told Crail he would, and he stood in the high-paneled chamber and argued that he had acted to protect the children, and that the seizure had been a lawful precaution misread by an insubordinate guard, and the Queen's advocate let him build the whole grave edifice of it, then asked him one question, the same one. Where had the children been going to be taken, and to whom, and when returned? And Lord Cassius Vane, in the high chamber as in the cathedral, as in the gallery as at a nursery door, could not answer it, and that silence convicted him more completely than any witness. He is somewhere now where he arranges no one's calendar. The Duke of Marenholt is stripped of his honors and his place in the succession and lives, last I heard, on a remote estate with men at his gates who do not answer to him. Neither will ever again stand within 100 miles of a child of the house of Harrowgate. The Queen kept her word to those who had kept the line. Mistress Etta Harrow, whom Lord Vane had indeed spent the better part of his lost hour trying to remove from an empty nursery, and who had given him, by her own dry account afterward, a great deal of trouble and not 1 inch of door, was named to a new office that the Queen created for the purpose, keeper of the royal household's children, with a standing that no controller can ever override, an authority over who may and may not approach the young princes and princesses of the house, and a salary she pretended to find excessive and accepted without further argument. She still carries a candle on Founder's Day. The children still walk the old Vigil Road with her once a year, by candlelight, learning the way out of their own home in the dark. Only now it is taught openly, and called by its right name, which is not a game. Bertrand Lowe, the underfootman who could not stomach an unanswered question, was offered any place in the household he cared to name. He asked to train for the guard. He is one of us now, and a good one, and I trained him myself, and the first thing I taught him was the last thing this story is about. As for Crail, the Queen offered him a commission, and he declined it with grave courtesy, saying he was too old to wear a man's livery and too set in his ways to take a man's orders again, but that he would take a fee if Her Majesty had work for a man who knew how the wicked move children in the dark. She did. He keeps a quiet eye on the roads and the river gates of Eldermoor still, and twice a year he comes to the palace and drinks with me, and we do not say much, because men who have stood the same dark do not need to. And I went back to my post, not the nursery door, the prince's door, my own door, the one I should never have been moved from, restored to me by the Queen's own hand with an instruction that no seal but hers would ever move me from it again. I stand it yet. Princess Maelin is older now, and taller, and still narrates her schemes aloud to a long-suffering cat, and when she passes me she says, "Sergeant Reed," with great gravity, and I say, "Your Highness," with greater, and once a year on the anniversary of that cold gold afternoon, she stops, and looks up at me with her mother's clear gray eyes, and asks me the question, our question, hers and mine, to be sure I still have the answer. "On whose authority, Sergeant Reed?" "On the only authority that outranks a seal, Your Highness," I tell her. "The one that can still answer for the child at the end of the order." And she nods, satisfied, the steel in her settling a little deeper, and goes on her way down the gallery toward whatever throne the years are shaping her for, and I stand my door, and I think that of all the things I have learned in a life of standing still, the truest is this: that the strongest thing a man can do is not to draw a weapon or strike a blow, but to stand quietly in a doorway when everyone around him is hurrying and refuse to move, and ask the one small question that a wicked plan cannot survive. They called it courage afterward. It was never courage. It was only a door and a question, and the refusal to open the one until I had an answer to the other. That is the whole of it. That is what becomes of the child, when there is one man left who will not open the door.